The war between Russia and Ukraine is one of the most significant conflicts in Europe since the end of the Cold War. However, this conflict has deep roots stretching back centuries. To understand the war's origins, we must delve into the shared and often tumultuous history of Russia and Ukraine, examine the geopolitical tensions of the 21st century, and look at the key events leading up to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022. The story of Russia and Ukraine begins in the early Middle Ages. Both nations trace their origins to the Kievan Rus, a medieval federation of Slavic tribes that spanned parts of modern-day Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. At its height in the 10th and 11th centuries, Kievan Rus was a powerful state with close ties to the Byzantine Empire. However, by the 13th century, the Mongol invasions fractured the region. Over time, what we now call Russia expanded to the northeast, while the territories of modern-day Ukraine remained under the influence of various powers, including the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and Poland. Ukraine was divided, with the western part often aligning with Poland and the eastern part with Russia. The relationship between Russia and Ukraine became increasingly complicated, particularly as Russia's imperial ambitions grew in the 18th and 19th centuries. By the late 18th century, much of Ukraine had been absorbed into the Russian Empire after a series of wars with the Ottoman Empire and Poland. Ukraine's culture, language, and identity were suppressed by the Russian imperial authorities, who sought to unify their empire under the banner of Russian dominance. The story of modern Russia and Ukraine takes a significant turn after the Russian Revolution of 1917, when the Soviet Union was formed. Ukraine briefly declared independence during the Russian Civil War, but by 1922, it was fully incorporated into the Soviet Union. Ukraine, particularly its agricultural economy, became an essential part of the Soviet economy. One of the darkest chapters in this period was the Holodomor of 1932 to 1933, a man-made famine that struck Ukraine. Millions of Ukrainians died as Soviet policies forced grain production to be shipped to other parts of the Soviet Union, leaving Ukraine's population to starve. Many Ukrainians view this as an act of genocide by Stalin's regime, and it has left deep scars in the collective memory of the nation. During World War II, Ukraine was a battleground between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. The war left Ukraine devastated, with millions of casualties. Following the war, Ukraine remained a crucial part of the Soviet Union, though the desire for independence simmered beneath the surface. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine declared independence, marking a new era in its history. The move was overwhelmingly supported by the Ukrainian people in a referendum. However, the dissolution of the USSR left Ukraine with significant challenges, including economic instability, corruption, and political fragmentation. Russia, under Boris Yeltsin, was also undergoing a difficult transition from communism to a market economy. The newly formed Russian Federation saw its influence over former Soviet republics, like Ukraine, wane. But Ukraine's desire for sovereignty was clear. This was a crucial moment, setting the stage for the geopolitical rivalry that would shape the future of Russia-Ukraine relations. While Ukraine pursued closer ties with the West, Russia sought to maintain influence in its former Soviet territories. This tension would persist for decades, as both countries navigated their newfound independence in a shifting world order. In 2004, Ukraine faced a turning point. The presidential election was marred by widespread allegations of fraud in favor of the pro-Russian candidate Viktor Yanukovych. Ukrainians took to the streets in what became known as the Orange Revolution, demanding a fair election. The revolution led to a rerun of the election, and the pro-Western candidate Viktor Yushchenko emerged victorious. This victory was seen as a victory for Ukrainian nationalism and a pivot toward Europe, which alarmed Russia. The Kremlin viewed Ukraine's pro-Western stance as a threat to its influence in the region and a signal that NATO and the European Union were encroaching on its sphere of influence. In 2010, Yanukovych returned to power after a disputed election, but this time, his policies tilted toward Russia, especially in terms of energy deals and regional integration. This set the stage for future unrest, as Ukrainians increasingly divided between those who favored closer ties with Europe and those who supported Russia. In 2013, President Yanukovych made a shocking decision. He abandoned a planned agreement with the European Union and instead accepted a Russian bailout package, leading to widespread protests known as the Euromaidan protests. The protesters, mostly in Kiev, demanded greater European integration, while Yanukovych, backed by Russia, resisted these calls. By February 2014, the protests had become violent, and Yanukovych fled to Russia. A new pro-Western government took power in Ukraine, and this political upheaval angered Russia, which saw its influence in Ukraine slipping away. In response, Russian forces quickly seized Crimea, a peninsula on the Black Sea, and held a controversial referendum that resulted in Crimea's annexation by Russia. The West condemned this act, and sanctions were imposed, but Russia's grip on Crimea remained firm. Simultaneously, pro-Russian separatists in the eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk declared independence, sparking an armed conflict with the Ukrainian government. Russia supported the separatists, though it denied direct involvement. The war in Donbass began, a conflict that would last for years, with thousands of lives lost and no clear resolution. After years of a simmering conflict in eastern Ukraine, the situation took a dramatic and catastrophic turn in February 2022. Vladimir Putin, citing threats from NATO and the West and claiming that Ukraine posed a danger to Russia's security, launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Despite initial expectations that Russia would quickly overwhelm Ukraine, the Ukrainian military, backed by substantial international support, mounted a fierce resistance. Major cities like Kiev, Kharkiv, and Mariupol became battlegrounds. The conflict soon escalated into a brutal war of attrition, causing widespread destruction, countless civilian casualties, and an ongoing humanitarian crisis. The war between Russia and Ukraine has sent shockwaves around the world. Western countries, led by the United States and the European Union, have provided extensive military and financial aid to Ukraine. In contrast, Russia has faced sweeping sanctions aimed at crippling its economy. Yet, despite these pressures, Putin has continued his military campaign. As of 2025, the war continues with no clear resolution in sight. The conflict has reshaped European security, caused significant displacement of civilians, and sparked a global food and energy crisis. The future remains uncertain, but the determination of Ukraine to defend its sovereignty and the ongoing international support for its cause remains central to the war's trajectory. The Russia-Ukraine war is a complex, tragic, and ongoing story with deep historical roots. It is a conflict that goes beyond regional politics and impacts the global balance of power. As the world watches, the war's outcome will define not just the future of Ukraine and Russia, but the future of global geopolitics for years to come. The people of Ukraine, determined to preserve their sovereignty and way of life, continue to fight. The world hopes for peace, but only time will tell when this devastating conflict will finally end.